Hey everyone, and welcome to the Ethnically Podcast, the show dedicated to amplifying diverse voices in every industry across society. Have you ever felt like your story wasn't being told? Here at Ethnically, we celebrate the journeys of those who defied expectations and carved their own path. We delve into the unique experiences of ethnic communities and the incredible things they've done to leave their lasting impact on society. My name is Adarsh Ramchurn, founder of Ethnically, and each week you'll hear inspiring stories of people who broke down barriers and redefined success. You'll hear stories of resilience, innovation, and the power of community. Whether you're an aspiring creator, entrepreneur, changemaker, or someone who just wants to see a more equitable society, the Ethnically Podcast is your podcast. Make sure to follow the podcast on your preferred podcasting platform so you don't miss an episode. Now, get ready to be inspired by journeys that are anything but ordinary. So, let's get ethnically. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Ethnically Podcast. On today's episode, we have a very, very special episode. It's a bonus episode, and I'm joined by Oliver McCourty as the UK's Chief Gen Z Advisor. Oliver, thank you for joining me today. How's your day been?
Thank you. Well, I have to say I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here. And so thank you for inviting me. My day's been amazing. Had a PT session this morning, recently got into this habit of getting a PT, so third one, and just have to improve my diet, lots more protein. Yeah.
That's what we like to hear. We have to give a massive shout out to Tooting Film Studios, where we are hosting today's podcast episode. So if you want to learn a bit more about them, we'll put some links in the description to check them out. Oliver, obviously I mentioned you're the UK's Chief Gen Z Advisor, but could you share a bit more about your own personal journey and how you've got to becoming the UK's Chief General Advisor, Gen Z Advisor? Keep that tongue twisting a bit. But yeah, if you could share a bit about your journey and what's kind of shaped your perspectives.
Thank you. Yes, it is a tongue twister, yes. And well, I'm very passionate about helping Gen Z. And so my journey really began 5, maybe 10 years ago. So I was elected member of Youth Parliament, and so that gave me the responsibility over representing 250,000 young people across Surrey. And then I joined a young people focused startup, helping them get mentors, helping them get jobs. And they claim to have 1.7 million young people in their community. They launched a fantastic podcast. And so I've spoken with and helped a lot of young people. And I can see the demand is certainly there, with 300,000 employed across the country and a quarter now having a diagnosed mental health illness. I've just been very focused on how do we help as many young people as we can. And age is a protected characteristic anyway, so I think more should be done. And there's always more that can be done. And so after leaving Youth Group, I then created Opportunity M. And the focus was, how do we recruit as many Gen Z as we can into companies? And that's an ongoing challenge, especially with budget concerns that companies have, and goodness knows. And so I've pivoted slightly and now do wellbeing workshops with Ella Grace Gregoire, who's a fantastic individual, very positive. And on the weekends, work at a supported living accommodation with Serenity UK Care. And so that's a little bit about me.
No, it's amazing that you're doing so much to kind of support Gen Z young people across the country, no matter what field or industry they're in. I think you make a really good point around trying to get more Gen Z representation in every sort of level of society. And I think if we tie it back to ethnically and trying to amplify diverse voices across society, obviously Gen Z diverse voices are also very underrepresented. They're both, those characteristics combined make them one of the most disproportionately impacted groups in society. I wanted to ask a bit more about that. And what's your interpretation of diversity and inclusion with the Gen Z lens on? How do you see it, and how has it impacted your work?
Well, diversity and inclusion's very, very important, especially when balanced with the idea of meritocracy. So ideally, it'd be a system whereby we're as open as we can be, but also with the results and similar values, so that we have a united goal which we can strive towards, and to always look at thriving and moving upwards and upgrading bits. And one stat I learned, which was surprising, Gen Z make up about 1/5 of the UK population. And so Gen Z is anywhere between kind of 16 to 28, 29. And yet, so they make up 1/5 of the population. And yet I was working with the Cabinet Office recently. They said that when it comes to public appointments, only 1% of, I believe, 18 to 24-year-olds are actually representative of the Gen Z within if it comes to non-executive director roles or public appointments in general. And I think 7% are those anywhere from 40 and below. And so that's still only 8%. And yet we would make up about 20%. And so that it's less than half of the representation that is, I mean, Gen Z are going to be the future, and yet they get less than half the voice. So I think there's always more that can be done. And so I'm going to be working on that with a special project upcoming.
No, it would be interested to hear about that special project a little bit later. I think you make a really good point in terms of how underrepresented and how I think the biggest misconception I find when I speak to different generations around Gen Z is that we kind of act too big for our boots, and sometimes we have opinions that we're not entitled to have, and we want to act in a way that we're not entitled to have. But I think I like this term that I've kind of coined, which is experience is expiring. And I think we see that with young people, with Gen Z communities, and now we've got Gen Alpha coming up as well, we're going to see a lot more of that in society, of us taking accountability. And hopefully we can start to see more Gen Z represented in executive positions, hopefully coming soon, and obviously with a lot of your work that you're doing. I wanted to talk about like your work within sort of relationships and business, and how you've kind of strategized your work. How does cultural influence impact that?
Sure. Well, when you say cultural influence, what do you mean?
I'm talking about sort of 2025 and how everything is we're kind of in a bit of a sticky patch in terms of a kind of a shift more towards far right politics, and how that's impacting culture. We've talked on the diversity and inclusion lens. We're seeing companies starting to do a lot more work, but probably not doing enough. How does that all impact your work and your strategies in business?
Sure. Well, I'm very results driven. And so when it comes to what impacts me most, usually it's about the objectives and aims that I have. When it comes to diversity and inclusion, I was speaking with a VP of Deutsche Bank, and they have lots of different goals and plans in order to increase diversity and inclusion, which I'm very happy to hear. And I mean, well, when it comes to Gen Z challenges, I was speaking at Yorkshire Building Society Roundtable, and one of their chiefs was there, and a few other people, and they gave a huge report, which I definitely recommend looking at. And one of the stats was that 65% of Gen Z can't afford to save, which I thought was staggering, considering the cost of living crisis and the rising housing prices and the increase in individuality, or kind of a self-serving type nature rather than a community-based foundation. And so that leads to lots of different mental health challenges. And so there are lots of challenges when it comes to how the culture influences me. I mean, culture influences everybody, for good or bad. And so that's why it's very important to have a kind of values-driven purpose. Or there's a book by Pastor Rick Warren called Purpose Driven Life. And so certainly that's been something I've been looking at when it comes to what is my purpose in life. And I said to my pastor, surely being a father would be a good enough purpose. And he said, actually, no, you need to keep thinking about it. So that's why helping Gen Z in general, I think, is the right thing to do. So that's probably my purpose.
Yeah, and I think purpose is kind of like that one goal that you kind of strive to work towards, no matter what work you're doing. And I think knowing that what you're doing within sort of the Gen Z communities and society is really powerful and empowering. I think you make a really good point around culture. Like, it's for good or for bad, it's always going to impact. And I think having that sort of influence on your work, and I'm sure with your work with Opportunity M as well, that's definitely going to continue having an impact. And it'll be interesting to see like what the next few years hold for Gen Z in particular, but also your work and how that's gonna impact it. You kind of touched on this already, but I did want to ask around sort of the representation of diverse ethnic groups from a Gen Z background in leadership positions, because that's essentially one of the reasons why I set up Ethnically as well, because I believe that there isn't enough representation of ethnic voices around society. Role models, we don't really hear about them. But one of the other things is within every industry, I feel like diversity and inclusion, having a diverse voice around the problem, helps solve the problem. And I feel like diversity is the solution to every problem in the world. That's one of my sort of firm beliefs and North Stars when it comes to ethnically. So what are your thoughts on representation of diverse ethnic voices that are from the Gen Z community?
Yes, I mean, I haven't really seen any Gen Z. There are Gen Z leaders, but usually they're founders. I haven't seen many Gen Z CEOs as such from a large institutional company.
What does that say around the institutions? Is it that like Gen Zs are kind of founding their own companies and kind of taking the initiative themselves?
Well, it's a very saturated marketplace when it comes to job searching. So even getting a job is difficult, let alone progressing in a company alongside the politics involved. And so I can easily see, and I followed the same route as you did, and as many Gen Z have done, and just thought actually it would be far easier just to create my own company, because then I have more freedom to say what I'd like to say or help the people I want to help, rather than it just being a tick box exercise. I mean, these large organizations, there's so much competition when it comes to, even when you're in the company, to then progress into the organization. And I can see how experience is very much valued. If someone's been in the role for 10, 20 years, then it feels like surely there should be some promotion opportunity. But my stance on things is that value can always be created, even if it means stepping outside of the company you're working at, even if it's a big company, and then starting your own. Obviously, there are risks attached to that, but there are also opportunities. So I find that with my lens of opportunity, sometimes I lose that lens of risk, which is why I tend to be more risky when it comes to opportunities, or certainly I'm more focused on generating opportunities than the risks attached with them. I think it's a more positive and optimistic lens.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think not to generalize the whole of sort of the Gen Z generation, but I think we probably are more likely to take risks and try and seize those opportunities when they do come up. And I think trying to empower and make sure that we're as a community are making sure that's still happening, because I think there's a lot of influences now with social media and people want to try new things, but also people are trying to put people off and say like, look, don't do that, don't found your own company, don't even like I could particularly say around sort of more senior voices that are trying to shut down. Do you think that's quite dangerous as well when we're talking about organizations within business, within society that are trying to shut down Gen Z voices?
Well, there are always opportunities we can create and be more inclusive when it comes to Gen Z voices. So that could mean inviting passionate Gen Z individuals who are very intelligent into advisory positions. I feel like every company should have a Gen Z advisory board.
Youth board or something.
And yeah, I don't
Yeah.
see that. Especially with companies who have products or services that are targeted towards Gen Z. It does surprise me with how few. Really, I haven't seen any, besides my work at the youth group where we created them for companies. I haven't seen any natural youth boards or Gen Z boards. It surprises me that when a lot of their clients are Gen Z, that they don't have that. So I think there could always be advisory boards to include Gen Z into these big companies. There could be speaking opportunities to engage some of the staff who are Gen Z. And so there are always opportunities to create a more inclusive space for Gen Z. We just have to think about what they would be, pitch it and propose it. And it's difficult because I find one of the barriers into entryway into opportunity generation is the time saturation of these leaders, because everybody wants to speak with them. Sometimes it's for their own personal ego so they can look good online. Sometimes it's because there's a whole host of different reasons. But once you can get that foot in the door and speak with them and give them lots of valuable ideas, and you can share with them the value it would create. If there was a Gen Z board that really understood the marketplace and the demographic, and not only the staff who are Gen Z, which is increasing, but also the buyers of their products and services are also Gen Z, which is again increasing, then that would only, I would have thought, increase the value proposition, because then they can suggest new ideas.
Competitive advantage.
Well, it would be a competitive advantage, yes. And so I'm going to be hopefully supporting companies with adopting this idea of Gen Z boards. I mean, it doesn't have to be that long. It could just be an hour a month or an hour a quarter. And every company has an hour a quarter in order to do that. And I think we can get their chief execs on board, even their COOs or chief commercial officers. So I don't really feel there can be an excuse not to have a Gen Z board.
No, I completely agree. I think because one of the things I find with normal boards is, and they've sort of tried to recruit like a young board member or a young trustee if it's a charity or non-profit. And my own personal experience, I find that it's quite hard to have my voice heard or have people that kind of agree with what I'm saying when I'm a young board member on a board of all senior members. And that's from my own experience being on a charity board. But I find like definitely with the youth board, you have that more sort of togetherness, that cohesiveness, and you can drive that change and challenge the board because you're together as a unit. So I definitely think that's something that I personally will want to see.
I should note, I also want these board members to be paid, because I see a lot of
That's very
corporations
true, yeah.
abusing the trust and time of Gen Z, and so it would be fair to pay these board members.
No, 100%. I think we were speaking just before we got on the podcast as well around like unpaid internships and the sort of danger of that. But definitely when it comes to leadership positions, voluntary positions, even like, board members and executive roles for Gen Z members of society, I think, having that sort of paid, even if it's a remuneration or an opportunity or things that they can tangibly get rather than just the experience. Because like I said earlier, experience is kind of expiring. And I think a lot more people and a lot more boards and companies are leveraging unique perspectives and views and what people think and their ideas and how that's shaping strategy rather than the experiences you have. And I think, that's where I think Gen Z probably will have the most to input when it comes to this sort of thing.
We can add responsibilities to being part of the board member to help justify the remuneration. So it could be find 10 stats which relate to Gen Z's adoption of this service or this product, or there could be added responsibilities. So the company doesn't feel like they're just paying people to speak or have like a mother's meeting or just to have fun and chat, just so that it's more structured, the board meeting, because it should be a structured meeting. And so that probably would come with responsibilities. But I think that would be a fair idea and
And I think
proposition.
that's really important point, because a lot of related to diversity and inclusion, when we're sort of involving Gen Z voices or diverse voices, a lot of it sometimes can be seen as tokenistic and you're just kind of doing it for the sake of it. But like you mentioned, there's so many positive reasons why companies should be doing it, can be doing it. And like I said, they get a competitive edge. So I definitely think that's a lot of work that we need to start pushing forward, definitely with what you're doing at Opportunity M, which is kind of a nice segue onto some of the other questions that I have lined up for you, Oliver. I was just looking at your journey and kind of going from sort of the intern to chief of staff and growing your leadership. And this is something that could probably resonate with a lot of Gen Z voices of wanting to become leaders and develop that leadership skill. What some of those key lessons that you learned during that time of developing yourself as a leader and growth, and what lessons can you share with maybe some of the Gen Z voices that are listening to this podcast?
Lessons I've learned. Well, certainly to know our value as individuals. I find that sometimes I'd be kind and say, okay, I'll work the night or I'll work more hours, but then that wasn't recompensed. And so it's my decision ultimately, and so I take the blame. So I'm not blaming anybody for that decision. However, knowing my value would mean that I prioritize my health and well-being. And if there is more work that's needed to be done, then either a salary increase or at least be paid those hours, and to get that in writing as well. Because there are lots of verbal contracts, or you could agree with something on your boss via a WhatsApp and the messages are deleted after 24 hours. And then that could be used against you. And so being more smarter when it comes to communications, getting contracts signed. I tried partnering with Brand Advance Group. Unfortunately, they didn't pay their invoice. And so even though it was in emails, sometimes you do need a contract, a signed contract, in order to get that payment. And so I found the world of entrepreneurship is very challenging without contracts.
Yeah.
So I have learned the importance of contracts. Another learning would be the importance of knowing what you want. And so some people feel like they want to, certainly I felt this. I thought, okay, it would be lovely to meet with these group CEOs and these chairs and CEOs of large organizations, or chancellors, or prime ministers. And what you find is that really people don't really care as much, maybe for the first few days, the first few weeks. But if you have a bigger vision, such as using these contacts in order to create good for society, whether it is creating Gen Z boards or more inclusion and diverse voices, then I think it's more tangible or more worthwhile. And so not just to see these people, to see them, like I was kind of in the mindset of doing, I thought, yes, that's cool. It could also be used in order to decrease the salary as well, because you can say, yes, you'll meet with all of these fantastic people. However, with the cost of living crisis, I think young people should be more aware of the opportunity costs of sacrificing salary for meeting with cool individuals. I mean, that might only be a very niche type of perspective, because not everybody gets to see these cool people. But money is a big thing. And so I think more focus should be on there should be career plans. And so I'm slightly going on a tangent because that is my learnings.
Yeah.
But if it comes to upgrades we can make with society and Gen Z, I think or employment in general, I think all employees should have a career plan. And so they can see where they're going to be going in 5 or 10 years' time. They can see how much value they'd be adding. What I found is that it could be suggested to employees to do different training courses. However, that doesn't then lead to an increase in salary. And so I paid for a leadership course with Oxford because I saw the leader of Serenity do that. And no criticism to Serenity. However, but it did cost £2,000. It was my choice. However, as of yet, that hasn't actually made a difference when it comes to an increase in salary. Salary isn't everything, but I think young people should be very aware of salaries and have career plans so they don't fall into despair and they don't just feel like they're a cost to an employer and a number. They feel like a valued employee who can continuously add more value to an organization, provided they have a pathway to get there.
I think you touched on a number of things there. I think, first of all, the contracts, and I can speak from personal experience of documenting everything that you're working on and ensuring that you've got a record of it. And I can't stress enough how important that is, because, like you said, there are still people that could take advantage of that and exploit that, but also for your own sort of metrics of if you're becoming a leader and you want to hold people to account, which is a definite leadership trait that we need as leaders. That's definitely going to be something that you need to be doing. And then I think kind of what you mentioned around employees and Gen Z young members of staff kind of idolizing potentially maybe not the wrong people, but people that don't have the same sort of vision and career purposes as them. I think that's a really important point, because when I speak on Ethnically and talk about role models, I always try and identify role models that people want to resonate to, not because of their career or what they're doing, but more around their story and their ethos and what got them to where they are, why they do what they do, and how they got to where they got to. So that's kind of a lot of what you kind of mentioned around, understanding what the opportunity cost is of doing all of these things. And I think, again, that's something probably when people ask what's the most important thing you learn in leadership, they'll probably say something like listening, or I don't know, a different answer. But I think your answers are very different, but very much relevant as well, which I really, really appreciate. Kind of staying on the theme of leadership, but kind of switching a bit to more skills-based questions. If I'm a Gen Z listening, or well, I'm a Gen Z, but if someone is listening and they want to sort of develop skills for today's modern economy, and you mentioned the cost of living and things are getting difficult, what skills would you say are the most important for someone to be honing in on in order to stand out in this economy and really thrive and create that impact that they want to create?
Goodness. Well, I'm a big believer in loyalty when it comes to being a part of a company. However, because companies don't usually have a loyalty bonus or value, or at least express the value that loyalty brings to a company monetarily or in terms of opportunities, exclusive or not, I can see why Gen Z are more prone to living organizations, because loyalty isn't really valued. I like what Apple do. I heard that every year an employee works at Apple, they get £1 more an hour. And so that is a loyalty bonus. But companies, some of them don't have annual reviews or bonuses. So when it comes to skills, I probably would have been under the mindset of loyalty. However, now I would say definitely honesty is a very good value to have. The difference between values and skills are fairly ubiquitous. I mean, I would say they're largely similar. Skills in the more value-based economy would probably be communication. It's a very good skill to have, especially when negotiating salary increases. So negotiation skills, communication skills, also sales is a very important skill. And I didn't learn sales through training. It was really through watching and learning entrepreneurs, asking questions, and there's still more to learn when it comes to sales. But I would say those are really the 3 main things. I think it looks like the future for young people is going to be more responsibility, that's more self-driven rather than given by companies. I think companies, maybe this is just my view, but I think companies see Gen Z employees as just numbers. And so I think there is more urgency for Gen Z to have more vision and self-responsibility in order to acquire skills, because you can acquire them for free on YouTube, and there are some very good courses on YouTube. And so that means you don't have to be tied to an organization giving you training sessions. You can learn independently and still be valued for that. And so I'd say those probably are the best skills to have: negotiation, communication. I mean, those are the 2 core ones, really. Yeah.
And you mentioned sales as well. Yeah, I think that's really important, because we don't just, I guess you don't just say sales in sort of the business acumen point of view, but just sales in terms of how you sell yourself, how you sell your abilities. Is that what you kind of want me to touch on?
I suppose it's persuading people in order to see what you see. And it's also perhaps changing their mindset, because there are 2 different mindsets. There's one which is very, very limited, and so they feel like, oh no, we should save money all the time, we should only repair things, we shouldn't upgrade things, we should cut down things. Sometimes it's justified. However, I like the mindset which is more optimistic, especially because we only have one life, and so I like the more optimistic outlook, which is everything can always be upgraded. Sacrifices have to be made, but there's always a forward-looking kind of momentum to how I work, rather than a risk-averse method. So does that answer your question?
No, definitely.
So when it comes to sales, it's more persuading people and seeing if we could look at a more optimistic mindset, which is about collaboration, inclusivity, upgrading, rather than risk-averse and it's very limiting.
I think that's the golden thread, actually, that you just said throughout the answers, that having that optimistic mentality, whether you're communicating, whether you're negotiating, whether you're selling. I think that's the one thing that really stood out to me, because I think it's very easy to assume and think that things are doom and gloom and things aren't going right. But I think leveraging that optimism and making the most out of it and seeing where it can take you, I think is definitely something that is great advice, first of all. But I think when I look at Gen Z and the sort of organizations they want to work for, they don't want to work for organizations that aren't optimistic, that aren't thinking positively about the future, or aren't thinking that they can impact the future. They want to work for these companies that are organizations that are doing something good, meaningful change. And I think having those skills that you mentioned and improving them around communication, sales, and negotiation, but being optimistic throughout all of that, I think it's a great sort of answer. And I think, that's definitely some of the skills I think I'll probably resonate a lot with if I'm looking to develop this economy. One of your quotes then, again, around values of how you work and how Opportunity M works, is this quote, which is, "Unlimited is the amount of value we can add with the time we have." What does that quote mean to you, and why do you use that quote?
Well, I love this quote. Value is very relative. We see that in the art world. I mean, I saw recently that just a cube with nothing in it was worth thousands. And so because value is what we interpret, it's actually unlimited. And so we don't have to be stuck with just the salaries or the national living wage or the lowest wage which employers offer. We can decide our own value. And as long as it matches with the interpretation of the buyer or the one who expresses interest, then I don't see why we should limit that. We see actresses who get paid thousands and they could be younger than us. And so I don't see why we have to limit ourselves when it comes to value, as long as we have the time to do it, because when we die, obviously we can't really add value personally. So as long as we have time, we have value and we can create an indefinite amount of value.
I think that's really powerful. I think we kind of always see value and time as quite like a directly proportional thing. But I think, the amount of value you can add, the amount of time that you have, I think it's if you have a value mindset, I think, and you're values driven, that's definitely what resonates with me most when I read that quote. And I think it's a great sort of message and anchor to hold yourself and your business and everyone accountable to. But I think, when we look at sort of time relative to value, I think we can always say like we don't have enough time, but it's how you use that time. And I think definitely from a Gen Z point of view, that's the one thing that we have in abundance. We have time.
We do.
So we can definitely leverage that to create as much value as possible. Oliver, we're reaching the end of the podcast, but I don't know if you saw when I prepared you that we've got a few rapid fire questions. And this is what I do on the Ethnically Podcast, put people on the spot because, like I said, I do like to have those deep, meaningful conversations, but we also like to challenge people and get to know their perspectives on a few little things that people listening would wanna learn. So, rapid fire questions. I've got 5 questions for you. First one: what is your go-to productivity hack that has nothing to do with business?
Well, I was going to say the Pomodoro method, which is to set 20-minute increments to do things, but nothing to do with business. Productivity hack, probably the going to the gym has been a very good mindset booster because it oxygenates the mind so you can think clearer. A lot of things I do does influence business, so it's hard to find something.
That's why I did the nothing to do with business.
Which isn't to do with business, because arguably, actually, the gym does help with business. Goodness. See, my concept of business is very, it's almost, I've adopted it into my identity. So to separate business from productivity hacks is very challenging. I can't think of something at the moment which is a productivity hack, because productivity is related to business naturally. And so it could be an unanswerable question, because
that's true.
Productivity without business, what ends to what ends would it then be productive? So
because I kind of view this question when I think of my weekends and how do I stay productive on a weekend when I'm not really doing anything business related. I kind of keep my weekends a bit separate to everything. And some of the answers that I thought would probably be cooking a meal. I actually find that's like a different challenge, and it's like, okay, something I don't have to think about anything else, but I'm productive in a way that's like I'm doing something that's different. But then the problem solving aspect of cooking, when things go wrong, and then I feel like that sort of kind of resets my mind. And then maybe when I'm going on to the next thing I'm doing on the weekend, I'm got that energy that I can still stay productive, whether it's business related or not. But I feel like that's probably something that I would say. So no, I think it's quite a difficult question, to be fair, but they get easier from.
Well, arguably, cooking could help with business because you get the nutrients to think clearly.
Everything is related to business, but it's quite a hard question. But I think we got that covered. Next question. This one is business related. Best place you have traveled for business, and a must-see location, cultural landmark from that location.
Goodness. Well, there are 2 places in London which I love going to. I haven't actually traveled abroad for business as of yet. So the 2 places in London I love going to is the Crinkthea. They used to be an all-day thing, so you could just work there with your laptop for £8 a day. However, now they have afternoon tea, so it's only kind of 4 or 5 hours in the morning you have. The other one, which is now my favourite, is at 10 Trinity, Four Seasons 10 Trinity in London, because it's a very quiet atmosphere, easy to think, lovely kind of architecture in the space. Only £8 or £9 a day. You can kind of stay there the whole day. There are a couple of plug points there. So those are probably the 2 best ones in terms of reliability, sustainability. It gets you in a creative mindset. You have the people there who can help with drinks and fluids, so you don't kind of get drained. The lighting's a little bit dim, but overall it's the best. So those are the
best for your productivity relating to fact question 1. Next rapid fire question: what is one thing you wish you had more time to do?
my life is very much based around time freedom. And so I never think that I don't have time for something. And so there's nothing that I feel I'm restricted to do when it comes to time. And so I do believe I can do anything when it comes to time, which is lovely. But a lot of people don't have that because they're stuck in jobs like maybe in the police force. One of my friends, he's dictated what times he should work, even if it's a night shift, which makes it very hard to prepare when it comes to good sleeping habits, which impacts health dramatically. Although it's good pay though. So a lot of jobs do restrict time, but I treat time as the most precious resource we have because it's so limited. And so I don't feel restricted with time as many people do. Yeah.
Nice. I like that answer though. It's like you kind of have ownership over your time and therefore you feel like you're able to do everything within that time that you have, which is a really interesting answer. Next question. What's one skill you're secretly working on outside of work?
Goodness, well, definitely dating actually. And so I'm going to probably get a dating coach in a couple months. So I'm going to start with the PT, which I've done. So I'm on my 3rd one today and 4th one tomorrow. And then probably in a couple months have a dating coach. So I think that's probably one behind the scenes, which I'm looking to do. It's linked with communication, maybe sales and persuasion, but just in a different context.
In a different context.
Yeah.
Different contexts. I like that answer. It's really nice. No.
Relationships are very valuable when it comes to good well-being and mental health. And I think sometimes we forget that. We're very focused on our phones, but a relationship goes way beyond a phone, especially a healthy one. It comes to like meeting regularly, maybe a few times a week, discussing serious matters when it comes to the future, fun matters, but also serious matters, like what would you like the future to be? There is a trend of increasingly open relationships, which personally I'm not I'm just not that type of person. I quite liked long-term monogamous relationships, but that's me. And so I have a different kind of view when it comes to relationships, but there are loads of different types of relationships and they seem to work, certainly in the short term.
Yeah, and I think
But yeah,
with relationships, I think just on sort of outside of work, it's obviously has an impact, but definitely when I'm working, I think it's like the only thing you can think about if something's going wrong or like something's not like how it should be. You kind of that actually impacts your work the most, I find. So no, I can definitely relate to that in terms of, and it is a skill. It is like you said, communication and relationship building. I mean, you can obviously apply it to a business point of view, but definitely from like a more personal point of view, it is such an important skill that I think is very underrated in society. So I really like that answer as well. I like all your answers. I'm a bit biased, but last quick fire rapid fire question. What's a business trend you're excited about and how might it different for Gen Z?
business trend.
Or instead of differ, how will it impact Gen Z?
Goodness. Give me an example of a business trend.
Oh, that's putting me on the spot. Say a business trend, probably, I mean, there's the 4-day working week, which is implemented, or working from home, less coming into the office, something maybe along those lines.
Yes, the 4-day working week. I like it. I mean, certainly when it comes to weekends, that was brought about from my interpretation was religious culture. So we had the Sabbaths and we had the time off. I spoke about this at the cabinet office. I said, actually, because we now almost, some people work 7 days a week, or certainly there's a lot of pressure for CEOs to work almost all the time, because adding value, or just because we sleep doesn't mean the world stops. So when it comes to the business trend of 4-day working weeks, I think employers are probably against that because they like people adding value, as much value as they can. However, if it does benefit the mental health of the employees, then I don't see it as being any less kind of worthwhile than a 5-day working week, as long as the same value, because value isn't restricted necessarily to time. It depends what profession, because some things do take time. Like growing, like farming, you can't really accelerate it much. But kind of there's fertilizing the crops, there's the sunshine, but it's very hard to accelerate it much more. So some things are time bound. But outside of those professions where we have internet companies, then I don't see why a 4-day working week is any less valuable if you can get the same amount done.
I definitely know a lot of people from sort of Gen Z from a Gen Z background that are definitely for the 4-day working.
They love it.
I absolutely love the idea. I think it's people want to kind of relate, a great way to sort of wrap up the podcast, but kind of owning your time and valuing your time, and well-being and mental health being such a massive factor when it comes to people's working lives and lifestyle. I think the 4-day week is probably the perfect solution. Thank you all for listening to today's episode of the Ethnically Podcast. Oliver, thank you so much for being my guest on today's episode. I've learned so much about you, your work you're doing, how Gen Z can have a bigger voice, an even bigger voice in society, and the work that we can do to leverage that further. If you're interested in listening to more episodes of the Ethnically Podcast, please follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and TikTok, and make sure you subscribe to the episodes on YouTube, because we'll be posting a lot more video podcast episodes on our YouTube channel. Thank you all for listening, and thank you all for watching today's episode.